Helmet cam footage released on a Telegram channel affiliated with Russian airborne troops shows Russian VDV paratroopers assaulting Ukrainian positions in Kursk. The video shows the men advancing in an MRAP while firing towards the Ukrainian positions to cover their advance. This was done to suppress the Ukrainians in their position and force them into cover so that none of them could potentially use systems like the NLAW to act against the Russians in their vehicle. The Russians had to cross through a wide open field in order to reach the Ukrainian positions located in a tree line. Besides anti-tank weapons, a multitude of additional dangers must still be anticipated in such a situation, especially during this phase of the attack. Threats such as FPV drones and mines are among the most common here, and often these operations end before they even properly begin, as the vehicles fail to reach the enemy positions, either because they are hit by FPV drones, drive over mines, or both. However, in this particular case, none of this occurred and the men reached their destination. They quickly dismounted with the intent to apply pressure and gain the initiative. They established a base of fire to achieve fire superiority and then advanced toward the edge of the tree line. Apparently, this attempt was successful because there were few signs of resistance, and the Russians were able to advance easily without any problems or visible resistance. Two of the paratroopers even exposed themselves on the left and right without any cover. To their luck, no response to this relatively bold positioning occurred, and the Russians began to advance further into the tree line. First from the left flank and then from the right. It could be that the Ukrainians had already abandoned their position in the tree line and retreated at this point, which did not stop the Russians from continuing to execute their program. The actions of the Russians in this case were highly coordinated. They provided each other with covering fire, practiced bounding maneuvers, and set up security seamlessly. The latter was being carried out here by the camera operator, who is screening to the right while his comrades continue to close in on the Ukrainian position before he also continued to move up. The manner in which the Russians were able to maneuver freely in this firefight without being hindered in their freedom of movement strongly suggests a numerical disadvantage on the part of the Ukrainians in this situation. This gave the Russians a crucial advantage. We often hear the term 3-to-1 ratio in connection with an attack. This is a general rule of thumb often cited in strategic and tactical planning. It states that for an attacker to have a realistic chance of success, they should ideally have a numerical superiority of at least 3 attackers for every 1 defender. This is because defenders generally have the upper hand due to prepared positions, cover and concealment, fortifications, knowledge of the terrain, shorter lines of communication, pre-established fields of fire, kill zones, and other advantages. On the other hand, attackers often have to deal with natural and artificial obstacles, which typically result in higher losses as they advance under fire and attempt to breach defensive positions. Of course, this rule is not set in stone, and there are cases where it does not apply. The element of surprise, for example, can compensate for many disadvantages, as can gaining momentum through good training, high morale, or force multipliers such as artillery, tanks, drones, or air support. While the 3-to-1 ratio in favor of the attackers definitely played a role here, to be honest, without trying to armchair, I think the absence of force multipliers on the Ukrainian side played an even greater role in favor of the Russians. This absence allowed them to dictate the pace of the engagement. The Russian attack could have been fairly easily delayed, disrupted, or even denied at several stages of the fight with the use of FPV drones or drone drop grenades. For example, during the dismounting, the establishment of the base of fire, and at any other moment when no movement occurred on the Russian side. I would even go so far as to say that organic drone capabilities available to the Ukrainians at the company, platoon, and even especially squad level could have led to a very different outcome in this fight. And if you think that squad level capability is a bit far-fetched, hear me out. First, I know this would basically mean increasing the squad size by at least 2 or even 3 additional soldiers. Also, I know that this would most likely overstretch the squad by several kilometers so that the 2 or 3 additional drone operators could safely set up a base of operations to launch and operate their drones. But look at the Ukrainian fighting position in this video. You can see that they are already overstretched, as the Russians here are dealing with only one, most likely poorly manned, isolated fighting position. It's entirely possible that this position had already been abandoned, especially if we consider the lack of return fire after the few initial shots were aimed at the cameraman at the beginning of the video. Attaching drone operators to the squad level and integrating small drone operations as an organic capability would allow for the mixing of units. FPV drones and drone-dropping quadcopters can already increase the effective engagement range of any small unit with this capability to up to 10 kilometers, depending on the weather, so why not utilize this? This approach could also enable rotations at the squad level, ensuring that at least 2 soldiers are not stationed at the front line but instead operate further back in the rear area in a direct support role for their squad. This would undoubtedly relieve active combat troops. One of the main reasons for Russia's current territorial gains is the lack of such combat troops at the front. This results in many positions being undermanned, allowing the Russians to achieve territorial gains purely through numerical superiority, as the Ukrainians are unable to hold their positions and are forced to abandon them, exactly as shown in this video. I do not know exactly how the Ukrainians and Russians are currently handling this, but I think it is most likely through dedicated specialized units attached at no lower than the company level at best. However, I could be wrong, so if you know more, let me know in the comments. I have asked some of my Ukrainian contacts who are drone operators, but I am unsure if they will be able to respond in time before this video goes online. You can already see how the Russians have gathered around this firing position and have been able to remain calmly in a static position for an extended period without being harassed by drones. I've already cut at least 4 minutes of footage showing them just standing around. A lot of wasted opportunities for the Ukrainians, if you ask me. Of course, electronic warfare and jammers are a factor, and it could very well be that this assault was carried out simultaneously with other assaults on more critical locations, forcing the Ukrainians to concentrate their capabilities elsewhere. However, this position in Kursk was most likely recaptured by the Russians, and based on the footage, this may have even occurred without any losses on either side. Based on map data and geolocated imagery, it can be said that Ukraine has already had to cede 50% of the territory it had taken in Kursk back to the Russians. The territory held by Ukraine has shrunk to approximately 482 square kilometers. In many parts of the front, not just in Kursk, these gains come at a high cost in terms of lives and massive equipment losses, but not in this particular case, as seen in this video. However, it should also be noted that the number of Russian casualties, compared to October, which was the deadliest month for Russia since the beginning of this war, did not increase further in November. This does not mean that the losses in November were not high, but they were not higher than in October, which is statistically better for the Russians and certainly strengthens their resolve, as war for them is a numbers game, very much in line with old Soviet traditions.